Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. You're joining us on our regular Sunday sit, 4:30 to 6 p.m. every Sunday. Today we have Yushin teaching. There has been a slight change recently. We're going to be being online most of the time and we'll be in person once a month, that time being the third Sunday of every month from now on. So the next time you'll be able to join us in person at the UCOD facility and online at the same time would be on September 18th. We are also meeting, are doing our meditation as refuge Tuesdays, 6:30 to 8 p.m. on Zoom only. Joe Kai will be teaching this next one. Wednesdays, we have our Just Sit, our peer-led meditation group. That's every Wednesday on Zoom, 5:30 p.m. to 6:15 p.m. And Fridays, we have our loving kindness meditation group. That's on Zoom only, 4:30 p.m. to 5:15 p.m. I also wanted to mention that Dhammadina is going to be having a residential retreat. It's called, let's see, what was it called? It was Holding Each Moment with Wisdom and Love. It's a residential retreat with Leslie Booker, Ian Chalice, and Arena Wiseman. It takes place between October 24th and November 24th. It's a 2-week retreat, but you can choose to sign for the first week or the second week. I'm actually attending just the second week. I know it's a little difficult for a lot of people to get 2 weeks in a row off, so I would like to mention that. They do have spaces available for self-identified Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So if you are somebody who that matches, or you know somebody who that matches who would like to attend a residential retreat, go ahead and go to our newsletter or go to Dhammadina's website and sign up. Oh, and I almost forgot, we also have our intro to meditation class. That is going to be a very beginner's mind type of thing, where we come in and we get a refresher, or if we're somebody who's completely new to meditation, or you know somebody who's interested in meditation and wants to start with posture, breathing, etc., that'd be a great way to start. It is a suggested donation of $20 for that class, and it's going to be on the first Saturday of every month. The next one would be September 3rd with Mary. And that starts at 10 a.m. for the Saturdays. With that, I'll leave you to Yushin.
Thank you, Adrienne. Thank you so much. Good afternoon. It's wonderful to be here with you all. My name is Yushin, and I would like to say thank you so much to Adrienne for your support and for taking care of everything for us in terms of the technology and just so much more beyond that. I'd also like to say thank you to Mary and to Ian and to Joe Kai for the kind invitation to lead today. It's great to be here, and thank you to each of you present here today for sharing this time of meditation and reflection. I appreciate it. So let's begin by settling in, settling down, allowing our bodies and our minds to become still. The invitation is to still sitting. As we begin to settle in, we find a comfortable posture. So take a little bit of time to allow your body to find a way to be that is stable and that is comfortable, something that you can maintain. So you find that center, find that seat, and make contact with the floor, with the chair, with the ground beneath you, wherever those points of contact are for you in your seated posture. Begin to feel your connection to the room that supports you, to the place where you are, to this container that is practice and that is life. Begin allowing your body to rest. Allow your body to be. Breathing in a few deeper inhalations, your pace, just gently, and then releasing on the out-breath fully. Give yourself the gift of attention to breath, And as you settle in and as you settle down, allow yourself to tune into the sensations in your body. Notice any tension that you might be holding. Notice any way in which you might be contracting or tightening. And just bring some awareness, some light to that, allowing it to open up. Breathing gently. You may have an established practice that you wish to engage at this time. If so, please proceed. If you'd like direction, perhaps together we will begin by taking a few deeper inhalations and exhalations, maybe counting 5 deeper breaths in and out. And then from there, letting go of counting and just following the quality of one's breath, using the breath as an anchor for present awareness. Allow yourself to be here. I'll strike the bell once to begin the meditation period and once to end. Please feel free to adjust your position, stand and stretch, get a sip of water, whatever you need. Well, thank you again so much for joining today. We are in the midst of this series on emotion. And so Ian began the series by speaking on shame, and Jokai then spoke on love and hate, and then we heard from Mary. She spoke on grief. Today I'm speaking on sadness and joy. And then next week we're looking forward to anger and fear with Valerie. I hope that gives you a sense of kind of where we are in this conversation and with these emotions. I'm very glad to be able to be a part of the series. When I was asked to take part, joy and sadness just kind of came to mind for me. Just boop, right there. I think I feel a real affinity for both joy and sadness. But unfortunately, I can say so much more about sadness than joy. I can kind of go on and on about the sadnesses and the sorrows of the world, and you feel like you could just write and write until the pen runs out of ink. There and with joy is less familiar, but also very welcome. And I think when joy arrives in my life, it's sort of like a surprise guest, a surprise visitor. But I'm glad I'm glad to meet joy. Sadness, on the other hand, is like an old friend and someone that I'm very familiar with, and feel like I kind of understand the contours of in a very personal way. And really where I kind of come from when I look at the two together, joy and sadness, is that I feel really supported by a tradition of inquiry, the Zen tradition that has enabled me to really look into the nature of life. But with regard to this conversation, to look into the nature of emotion. And emotion has always been something that's very prominent in my life. So something that really needed and continues to need a very thorough and thoughtful and dynamic exploration. And so in this sort of supportive container of the Zen tradition, I have multiple wonderful supportive sanghas who have really provided a strong container and structure for this inquiry that I've personally undergone, I think, with regard to sadness in particular. And one of the things that really touches my heart is that I see that sadness and joy are not really opposites, even though they're often thought of in those terms. But they're deeply interconnected, actually. And I would say that the heart of the Zen tradition is compassion. And when I look at the way in which I've kind of come to understand what compassion is, I see that my journey, my entry point, was through deep personal sadness and sorrow. And that it was through the safety and the support of a place of practice and really strong teachers that I was able to really embrace, tenderly embrace and be with the depth of personal sadness I felt. I might even call this sadness grief. I think I would, in fact. Um, and that in entering into that sadness, that sorrow, that grief, in that kind of difficult to discern, mysterious dark night of the soul that happens. There's this thread. It feels as if there's a thread of light, that is always present when you're sad. There's a tiny flicker or thread of light or awareness. And that kind of begins as you embrace that, as I embraced that, to open and to become a little less fixed, a little less solid. And I feel that through our collective grief, through our collective sadness, if you identify as feeling sad, if you'd like to join me in that, there can be this opening through the embrace of that. And it's like being born through sadness into joy, in a sense. There's some sort of transformation that occurs. And maybe this thread that is the connecting piece could be considered compassion. That somehow within that beautiful, mysterious movement of sadness and joy, the interconnection, like I would say they're like this. They're just one within the other, or they're, just intermingling with each other. We come into this place of embracing things as they are, and there is a peace in sadness itself and a beauty in joy as well. And I think this is seen through the lens of the Heart Sutra. The Heart Sutra has a very special place in my heart. The very first line is Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, doing deep prajna paramita, clearly saw emptiness of all the five conditions, thus completely relieving misfortune and pain. And when I look at that line and when I feel into that line, I see all of us. I see each one of us. When a person sits, when one sits, and when one looks, and when one listens deeply with one's whole being, there's a great relief that can begin to come to be. It may be the relief of facing up to, coming into contact with what is painful, the difficult content, the thoughts, the emotions, the shame, the grief, all of this incredible content, all of this that we hold, that we are the container of and for. I feel like it is our condition to experience sadness and sorrow and suffering. And that compassion is the act of listening and loving and being within that condition that we all share. And that joy can be born of the courageous and tender act of embracing our suffering, of embracing the ways we feel ill at ease with ourselves. As this is the series on emotion, I was just looking into how do I understand emotion? What is emotion? And I remember my Zen teacher, Tenshin Roshi, um, defining emotion in a very simple way. He said it's a movement from the center. You know, that's before we give that movement from the center any particular name. But I feel like that's a beautiful way to define emotion, probably one of many ways. But it touched me. And as I was consulting the dictionary to see how emotion is defined. I read that an emotion is a physiological experience. That completely resonates with me. Emotion originates as a sensation in the body. And then this distinction, a feeling is your conscious awareness of the emotion itself. So in naming an emotion, we can then call it a feeling. But as Mary mentioned so beautifully, just honed in on with such skill in her talk, there can be this gap. So we can experience all kinds of things in our body physiologically, all kinds of sensations. And then it is not always simple to name that. So that's one of the challenges, one of the pieces of embodied awareness, of becoming aware of sensations and feelings in our body. What would we call it? And sometimes for me, I just do a little bit of free association with that because I will think that I'm experiencing something. I'll say I'm anxious. But then as I feel into what's actually going on in my body and I say, well, what is it? And I hone in and I ask questions and I inquire. I try to describe what it feels like, really move into it. I often find that I have different words actually to describe that sensation. And that when I hit upon the word that most closely feels to align with whatever the sensation is, there's often a release. It's so strange. It's as if by inviting my mind and my body to come into alignment, when that alignment is found, the body appreciates that, and so does the mind. It's a curious thing. So I was also interested to see that there are so many more emotions than we might ever imagine. Dr. Brene Brown, who Ian brought up, she's a wonderful social researcher who does a lot of work on shame and vulnerability and resilience. She's a social worker. One of her latest projects is this amazing textbook on emotion. It's kind of a workbook, I think. I had a copy and then I gave it to my mom, so I didn't get to go through the whole thing. But Dr. Brene Brown and her team, they identified 83, I think 80 plus, I'll say to be safe, different emotions that we experience. And when they were starting their research, they interviewed people to say, well, how many emotions do you come to mind for you or do you experience? And amazingly, people would name one or two or three, maybe four emotions, but wouldn't pan out into all of the many emotions that we do experience as human beings. I was also listening to a talk by Thich Nhat Hanh recently, and he was talking to his sangha and mentioning just the very many emotional states. And he said, there's something like 50 or more. and then he included thought within that. But I think that it's really wonderful to hear our leaders in various realms and spheres pointing to the importance of really looking into emotion and developing emotional awareness and becoming maybe emotionally intelligent people. So the way I would put it is just that emotion is, simply put, it's a condition of one's body and mind. That's what I say. So emotion involves our physiology, and it involves mental formation. It involves naming as well. And so joy, let's start with joy. The definition that I found that I liked in the dictionary was the emotion evoked by well-being. And when I think of joy, when I just call that to mind, what is joy? Some of the words that come up for me are delight, gladness, effervescence, aliveness, vibrancy, liberation, exuberance, luminosity. And I think there are so many more. That's just to get us started. That's what comes to my heart when I say, what is joy? We define words with other words, right? I feel like joy has the quality of being an activated peace. So if you cultivate peace when you're sitting, if you were to just kind of stand up and take that peace into action in the world, that could be a joyful expression. I was looking online just to see what do people say, you know, like on cards about joy, what's out there, what's written. And I found a couple of statements. Joy is the happiness that doesn't depend on what happens. Joy is the simplest form of gratitude. Joy does not simply happen to us. We have to choose joy and keep choosing it every day. I liked those. One of the other ones that I like a lot is, sometimes your joy is the source of your smile, but sometimes your smile can be the source of your joy. I feel like that speaks to that multi-directional quality to joy. Maybe you're smiling because you're so joyful, but maybe if you smile, you light up the room. You bring something of your light. So I feel like with joy, more so than with happiness, there's like a selfless component. There's a generous component, like joy is a light, and it's sort of that this natural light emanates through whatever form it may be. And so I sort of distinguish it from happiness in that it seems to have this generous and this gentle quality to it. Sometimes I find happy people, or people who are, you know, kind of have a happy spirit, I can find that a little bit oppressive or annoying. It can just impact me in that way. But I feel like I don't find joy oppressive in any sense ever, because it seems to have a lightness and a generosity and an appropriateness and a conformity to it, where it's a light that is given and that we all partake of. So sadness, the condition or quality of being sad. When I free associate sadness, I come up with unhappiness, sorrow, loss, despair, grief, melancholy, despondency, desolation, misery. There's so many different degrees, so many different words. So if you are feeling sad, there's just a lot of possibilities in terms of the shade of that sadness. What does it involve? What does it feel like? How would you name it if you were to look for the name? The name that most closely connects to what you're feeling. Thich Nhat Hanh said, I was looking up, sadness and what do people say about it, and of course there's not very much on greeting cards about sadness. It's more about joy. There are cards for sympathy and empathy and grief. There's some. There should be more, and they should be better. They should they should be more on point. But when I'm looking up what is sadness and what does the status quo say, I really didn't find very much at all. But I did find this beautiful quote from Thich Nhat Hanh that people have a hard time letting go of their suffering out of a fear of the unknown. They prefer suffering that is familiar. And I can absolutely relate to that. I would say that, there's a beauty in sadness, but sadness can also be a deep suffering. And I am so familiar with it that I do feel safe within it, And so all of these dimensions are very interesting to explore. We look at these emotions so often, many of them get put into the positive category, and many of them get put into the negative category. And to think in terms of pessimism or optimism, positive or negative, that always oversimplifies what is actually true, what is the actual fact. And the challenge we have is to see and to feel and to know reality as it is, the reality of our emotional life in this case. And so to really lean in that direction moves us away from this negative versus positive or good versus bad, this dichotomy. And there's this sense that whatever is arising, whatever emotion it may be, is of value, can be a teacher, and maybe can even be a friend. I really love the poem that Ian shared of Desmond Tutu's. He talked about emotions being teachers, and even the possibility of being a friend. So I would go so far as to say that that joy and sadness are not even opposite sides of the same coin, but are more so one within the other, one giving way into the other in ways that are not always entirely clear. So I was thinking I'd like to give examples of joy and sadness, but then it occurred to me that the examples I'd like to give, I'd like them to include both, and how they kind of coexist together, because so often that is the complex reality of our lives. Through my work in hospice care, I'm a hospice social worker. I met an elder with quite advanced dementia. And when I went to visit, they would always convey some very deep form of emotional distress. And so when visiting, I would sit, we would talk, I would listen and encourage and reassure. But it felt clear to me that this supportive social visit really didn't meet the need that was being expressed. There was some very deep emotional disturbance in it and a need for support. And one day when I went for a visit, I found them sitting alone on a bench in the hallway of this memory care facility. And I could see that they were crying, just tears coming down, felt like hot tears. And I went to them. I think I put my hand up in greeting first. I went over and I sat and I smiled. And this person smiled at me so genuinely and so sincerely through the tears streaming down, and just this bright, beautiful smile through the tears. And I kind of got a little closer, and I was just trying to understand what, if anything, could I do. And I reached out my arm and I touched their hand. And then they turned into me, into my body, and like nestled their head under my arm. And I kind of put my arm around. And they just went to sleep. And it was such a beautiful and poignant moment where this was somebody I had visited with frequently and never really felt that they were able to be at peace in any particular moment, especially when I was visiting. And I did have that narrative in my mind, well, what can I do? But I was looking and I was listening and I was reading the signs, and there was nothing to do. All it involved was a smile and, gentle touch and care, embracing one another in a painful place. That's all. And then there's the piece of going to sleep. And it reminds me of when I was a small child and I was upset, and nothing was better than just being wrapped up and loved and held. That was it. That was the transformative mothering. And the connection and the compassion. So within the difficulties of the ways in which our bodies break down on us and our minds may give out on us, and we may be less able than ever before to articulate our emotional states, there is still connection always, and there is still the possibility of peace and rest. There's this intermingling of sadness and joy. And so you might find yourself sitting at any point. You could be sitting with yourself when you're having a hard time, or sitting with somebody else who is. Or you might find yourself sitting as we do formally, sitting meditation together. And I think one of the beautiful powers of seated meditation, if you will, is this transforming of emotion. And I'm reminded of this line from a writing called Day of Reflection that we do here at Yokoji Zen Mountain Center. It was compiled by Roshi Bernie Glassman. And he talks about transforming the passions that afflict us. And I think the passions that afflict us can be many things. It doesn't have to only be emotion. Could be ignorance, could be a lot of other things as well. But emotions must certainly be included within the passions that afflict us, I would think. And so, one of the primary reasons that I need to sit myself personally is that my body and my mind contain the knots and the tensions and the contradictions of life. And so often, this is a painful condition. It just is. And so often, it's an unclear condition. So, my body and my mind are full of these intense contradictions. And I have to give space and time for those to open up and to kind of unfurl, to unfold. And I think the very, very simple, direct, yet steep antidote for this condition, this painful condition, is our undivided attention. Is just taking the time to allow the light of our undivided attention to shine through all of the knots, to begin to loosen them up. And that just happens of its own accord. And unfortunately, the ingredients of our mind and body are not really up to us. You know, what tensions we hold, what tightness is present, what contractions, what difficulty, what quality of emotion we might call it. But the task that we have is to be honest and upfront with ourselves so that we can begin to unpack that. And so I was thinking of sadness as a friend and of sitting zazen or sitting meditation and how I am in relationship with my emotions, with sadness or with shame or with whatever it may be. And I realized that for friends, for true friends, you always make space, right? You always make room. And so if my friend shows up, I have a place for them. Like Mary said, they can sit on her nice couch. You know, but within my very being, I have a place for anything that might show up. I'm not going to reject it. I'm not going to push it out. And on a good day, I say, you're welcome here. You're wanted. I accept you as if I had chosen you. I'm not going to get fed up or kick you out. You know, you don't have to fear. You have a place. You're free to stay, but you're also free to go. You know, it's kind of like not saying that you need to go, but you can open up the windows in a sense so that there's always the possibility of movement. So you don't have any content within. And I feel like this is kind of the art in meditation of ceasing to manipulate, of allowing the content of one's body and mind to be exactly what the content of one's body and mind is. In alignment, in accord. Not adding to, not taking away from, so that push and pull is not there so much. And while we so often identify so deeply and so strongly with our emotions, I am sad, you know, and we kind of own them and possess them, that can become very, very, very weighty. So the beauty and the art of sitting with our emotions is that space can be allowed to come in, so that ownership, that possession, that identification, that sense of claiming, that claiming energy is released. And as it is, there's the freedom for that emotion to move as it needs to do what it needs to do. And so one of the questions for me has always been, how do we hold, how do we contain, how do we be with emotion? And lately, my response has been lightly and gently and kindly. Allow it to be what it is, whatever its nature, where it is. Um, and in doing so, sometimes I feel conscious of being down or being sad. That's not something I really want to convey to people. Um, and typically, I don't think it is something that I convey to people. It's a part of me and it informs me. But I hold it very lightly. It's not oppressive for me or for others. And that was not always the case. There was a time when I held it in a way where it was so heavy and it just brought me down, and I just needed help with it. I needed help to carry the heavy weight of it. And so I was looking everywhere for who could who could help me with this tremendous weight, you know? Um, and so there can be movement in the ways in which we're in relationship with these emotions. And I just want to say, maybe for me, sadness is a big one. Shame is also a big one for me. But maybe for you, it's something different entirely. Um, and I'm sure that for many of us, we could name like what it is for us. Another example that comes to mind of how sadness and joy are interlinked, interconnected, kind of one in a sense, is just this recent time of seeing my partner Jokai's son Dylan off to school. He graduated from high school a few months ago, and recently last weekend we took him to college and left him there. And this ended up being very, very emotional for me. I think the most emotional part was when Dylan graduated, because it was this big day of celebration, just, so many speeches, and we all just felt so proud of all of the kids. And we felt very proud of Dylan, and his grandmother came and his aunt came, and they had beautiful platters of food and cakes, and all day long, just one part of the celebration to the other. And then at the end of the day, Dylan went with his grandmother and his aunt to LA to spend some time there with his family, his extended family. And Jokai and I came home to this empty, quiet house. And I just couldn't, I was so struck by the quietness. And Dylan loves to play video games, and so there's always like all kinds of sounds coming out of his bedroom. And I I looked forward to a quiet time, because all of those sounds really sometimes get to me. And I realized that it was true that I missed the noise. I missed it that night in particular. And I cried that afternoon, and I cried myself to sleep. It's just this coming together of the letting go and the loss and the growth and the wonder and youth, uh, and the launch, all of these feelings so kind of complex within my heart. And I felt as if I was going to be really upset. But then I just realized, no, this is okay. This is just how I'm feeling right now. This is okay. And I made myself a cup of tea. I did a little bit of light housekeeping. I was just moving through, and kind of honoring the complexity of the sadness and the joy. And so I think that if the examples I've given, they're just, from my life. We all have so many. I would love to hear some of yours. um, but if we really look, you might think that you have these experiences they were joyful. That's when you were joyful, and these when you were not. But I just find the contours of both in pretty much every experience, even if one is more is quieter or sort of dormant. It's always present, ever present, I would say. And so I referenced the Heart Sutra in the beginning, and the protagonist of the Heart Sutra is the Bodhisattva, the Bodhisattva of Compassion. And that is every single one of you. That's who that is. That is who fills that gap. That's us, for better or for worse. And we will do our best. But when I look at what is a bodhisattva, what is it to be compassionate? I think of a bodhisattva as kind of a radical liberator. And there's so many different ways to be a radical liberator, just infinite ways. So that does not look one way, not at all. It looks like you. That's what I say. There's so many ways to embody freedom of mind and freedom of heart, even when we may not feel so free ourselves. There's so many ways to kind of share that spirit. We are the one who hears, the one who can listen. We have these bodies and these minds. Here we are. And we do contain the joys and the sorrows of the whole cosmos. And sometimes those are experienced in very personal ways, and sometimes those are something that we look a little further afield to see, but not farther, not very far. You don't have to look very far. And so I don't think that the question is, how do we feel more joy and less sorrow? Even though it's always nice to feel more joy. But I feel like the question is, how do we allow ourselves to feel? How do we interrupt that tendency to numb ourselves? That tendency to try to numb, because it is so much to feel. It is so much. And my real sense of it is that the relief of misfortune and pain is in the tender embrace of misfortune and pain. That simple and that difficult. And we live in a world of misfortune and pain and sorrow and sadness. And as practitioners, our work is it's real work. It's to be a light and to love, and yes, even to be joyful, given everything, given all the facts, to still be joyful. Really feel like one kind or compassionate word or action can reduce another person's difficulty. Joy can be born of a single word or even just a smile. In the Zen tradition, I'll close with a really brief parable. It's the parable that has been told to me by my Zen teacher. Many times I've heard it. It's really short. It's that there's this forest fire, and it's just burning, 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 and there's a little bird that wants to help. And so the little bird fills her beak with water and flies over the forest fire and drops the water on the fire, and then goes back and fills up her beak and goes back and drops another little bit of water on the fire and does this over and over and over again. And at some point, the bird becomes exhausted and just falls into the fire. I really believe that speaks to what it is to be in service in our world today. It's, do we see the end of suffering? Do we see that before us? Or does it feel endless? And yet, what will we do? Um, Thank you all so much for being here. I appreciate it. Truly, thank you, Adrian, for keeping us on track. Adrian has kindly posted the link in the chat. If you'd like to make a donation to ICD, please do. I would just like to say thank you again, and I do hope that you all have a wonderful evening. And it's just an honor to get to be with you. So thanks so much.